speed, efficiency, ability to pivot, hit the ground running, all those different things that when you've got accumulated knowledge, you can do really easily. There is no onboarding because we're ready to go. In fact, we're ready to kind of, supercharge. It's that language that I think we found is better received. Nobody wants to feel like they have got a gun to their head and actually you as the incumbent are saying, waggy finger client, you'd be mad to leave us because we know more than you do. That's A, probably not true, and B, not a popular sentiment.
My name's Mike Lander, and you're listening to Higgle, the B2B Sales Club podcast, where we bring you actionable insights about sales RFPs, negotiations, and difficult procurement discussions from sales leaders, brand leaders, and procurement leaders. Please subscribe to get updates when new episodes are released. David, thanks ever so much for joining me on Higgle, the B2B Sales Club podcast. It's great to have you.
Oh, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, David, without further ado, tell our guests who you are, what you do, and something unusual about yourself.
Oh, gosh. Okay, well, let me start with who I am first to give you permission for my strange story. So I'm David Miller. I'm Chief Executive of Red Brick Road. We are a strategic and creative agency based in London. I'd like to think with ideas that travel globally for our clients. Mm-hmm. And I've always worked within advertising and marketing. So I started out as a graduate with Ogilvy, one of the best places to learn. We might talk about that later.
Amazing.
And worked with Ogilvy both in the UK and also out in Asia. So I worked for them in Kuala Lumpur and ran some business across Southeast Asia. And I have been lucky enough to be my own boss for, 16 years now, I think it is.
Wow.
So I joined Red Brick Road kind of 2 years into its inception. And a couple of years later, kind of ultimately did a management buyout of the agency with some colleagues. So I have worked for networks, I have worked for independents, and I have run my own independent now with colleagues for 16 years.
Congratulations. And I know just how hard that is as well, is building an agency from a base to where you are now, and sustaining that effort is not easy.
Listen, luckily we had L'Oreal as a client for many years. So my youthful good looks I definitely put down to lots of L'Oreal products because my age is you running your own business inside and externally.
Exactly.
Yes.
And something unusual about yourself.
Well, listen, I think people who know me are never surprised by this slightly random fact because I am a performer at varying degrees.
Yep.
And as a child, I was a stage school obsessive. I went to kind of acting classes, ended up kind of on Brookside, probably more than
Wow.
I probably should have done. So I'm a secret Scouser, as you can probably not tell from my accent.
I can't actually know.
And yes, I kind of did lots of kind of extra work and kind of popped up in Brookside and films and the like when I was a kid. Before I realised that actually I was too tall for the first time and probably only time in my life, and didn't get a part because I was too tall. Oh. So I, at that point, decided no, this isn't the job for me. I need more control.
Exactly.
So moved into the world of marketing and advertising.
Very good, excellent. Do you still act now or not?
No, sadly not. Although, is every day a performance?
Well, I was going to say, is every pitch a performance? Maybe.
Well,
maybe.
I think the answer is undoubtedly yes to that. Whether it's an accurate performance or a kind of over the top one, we should maybe talk about later.
We will. Okay, so let's get into the questions. So, as the incumbent agency, so when you're the incumbent agency, when a repitch or tender comes up, what are the key themes and conditions that secure your position as the reappointed agency?
Wow, it's a big question, isn't it?
It is.
I think there's an analogy that kind of I was kind of chewing over in my mind a little bit about this, which is, and it depends on context, right? Because again, we'll maybe talk about this, but to what extent is this a retender that's through because of a statutory requirement, mm-hmm. or is it a repitch or a retender kind of through duress and maybe through circumstance that maybe isn't as objective? And I suppose the analogy is then around your mortgage. Right. And when you have a mortgage, obviously you go into your mortgage relationship for a period of time, and then at the end, do you switch? It does depend on so many different matters, and often the easiest thing to do is to stay where you are, but there's always the option to move elsewhere. And I think that's where I think as the incumbent, really important for you to have a really good sense of what are the kind of conditions that have led to this retender or retender
Exactly
situation.
right.
Because is it that you've got a delighted set of clients, your work is flying, but, as a matter of course, they need to check every 3 years, 5 years, whatever it might
Good governance.
be. Yeah, good governance. Or actually, have you dropped some balls? Have you dropped lots of balls? And actually, are you in a very precarious place? And again, I think we can all relate to whether it's a bank or a mortgage to what's the customer service been like? What's the pricing like? What am I hearing my mates say that they're getting from their bank or building society?
Exactly.
And the grass is always greener, it would appear. So as an incumbent, you've really got to work out how firm is the ground that you're on.
And I think also, David, we can come back to this. What happens, let's say you're working for a brand director or the CMO, what happens when that stakeholder moves and someone else comes in?
I think that's typically in the scenario where it's not a contractual kind of, governance-led retender or pitch. It is, in my personal experience, 10 out of 10 times that is due to a personnel change.
Yes.
It's either somebody leaving or somebody joining. They may or may not be the same thing. It may be the revolving CMO chair. I think data changes on this. Is it every 3 years? Is it 5 years? Is it? I think I read something recently that it's every 2 years is the average tenure of a CMO. And I think that's where, for an agency, you've really got to make sure you're consciously, carefully mapping relationships with every client you have throughout their organization. Because kind of senior change often creates these situations. But actually, as an incumbent, if you have got really, really deep, valuable, respected relationships from junior to senior within an organization, you may have a new senior person who comes in who actually does listen to what their team say about the incumbent. And in that instance, you may be a critical part of the business that actually is too sticky, too valuable to consider changing. And that becomes a huge advantage then for you as an agency if you're the incumbent.
So let's just say we haven't had a change of CMO and it's a governance issue and the work has been very good, but there's been a few hiccups because there always are. There's always bumps in the road. And it goes out to retender. What when you're doing your planning for that kind of retender process, and it's normally driven or run through procurement if it's a big client, what are you doing to make sure that your win probability is as high as it can be? And the data that we've seen, and I look at quite a lot of different reports, and they all seem to coincide with approximately, assuming that you've done good work and that it's not a big change of CMO, the incumbent wins over 60% of those repitches. Now, there's a reason for that. That's not just good luck, and it isn't just the brands going, oh, well, it was all fine, let's just get a better price. There's good reasons why the incumbent gets reappointed. So do you want to just talk through what you think the characteristics are where you go, we should absolutely be reappointed?
Yeah, there's a number of things there. I think there's an analogy of a trust piggy bank that I was taught years ago. And, every relationship that you have, personal, professional, you're constantly putting kind of like coins in the piggy bank for kind of building trust.
Yes.
Typically, one mistake, often, it can be big or small, and the piggy bank bursts and you actually go down to zero. So in the scenario you've said there, where it sounds like the piggy bank is maybe half full rather than entirely full. A couple of mistakes, but actually everything to play for.
Good analogy.
I think as the incumbent, there's a double-edged sword of you have both a huge opportunity and a huge liability risk, because as soon as you know that there's going to be a retender or repitch, it starts for me. The process of the retender starts immediately. And you should know, unless it's a terrible relationship. We'll talk about it. It's not that. You should know about the retender way ahead of the market. which means you've got a competitive advantage. And straight away, for me,
exactly,
we would put into place a strategy to ensure that we are beginning to rebuild the plane while still expertly flying the plane, and making sure, by the way, expertly flying, you're getting better at the same time.
Exactly right.
Internally, that for any agency is a huge logistical and resource challenge and pressure, because you've got to do the job whilst also responding to a tender.
Yes.
And whilst the tendency might be, let's wait for the brief. Let's wait for the retender brief.
Oh, no, that's a disaster.
You really are losing out absolutely on your competitive advantage there, which is you've got a period of time to ideally be reshaping and contributing towards
get your fingerprints on the brief.
Absolutely. And if you can co-create, can't always. If you can influence, you can't always. You absolutely should. And similarly, post-submission, it's not, off to the pub, feet up, or maybe briefly. But again, the pitch isn't decided, the outcome, until it's decided. And again, as we know, that can often take days, weeks, months. So again, as the incumbent, you've actually still got the opportunity, license and permission to still be continuing to show why you're the right partner.
Correct. So, and in fact, I heard an agency just the other week, we know this from the data that came back, they should have been appointed. All the conditions were, their response was brilliant, they were the front runner, and then when they got to the pitch, they just weren't on their A game. They hadn't brought the right people. They went through their pack, the existing pack, and it was all a bit lackluster, really. Hadn't done the stakeholder analysis. Right. And what you're saying here, I think, is you've got an amazing opportunity from submission to the point whereby you're asked to come along and hopefully present. All of that valuable time, you're on the ground. You're with the client.
You are, but I think the thing that I think we can't understate here is psychologically, a retender or repitch is hard.
Yes,
because
absolutely.
You can't. Whilst I'd love to say we're a science-based industry, we're not. We're a subjective, personality-led industry. Therefore, unless it's a kind of governance-based retender, you can't help but take it personally, and my teams take it personally if there's a retender call, because we see it as a judgment that we're not delivering as well as would be liked. And so for any leader, of an agency or a repitch team, psychologically, you've really got to manage your team expertly through that process of, this is an opportunity rather than a risk, although it is a risk. But the opportunity to get feedback is a gift. Again, you've got to psychologically kind of get your head into this space of believing what I'm saying here. But to be told how we could do things better, to be told what was good, but with a bit more focus or a slightly different perspective could be great. That is a gift. But when everyone is working full out on delivering day to day and gets told by a client who we thought was a partner who loved us that actually we need to kind of up our game, can be hard. So I don't lightly say it's a big challenge for leaders to motivate their teams through a retender process. It is, and I think I mentioned to you when we had a pre-chat, there's pleased to say 2 retenders we've done this year that we've been successful in. But it's hard. It is hard. It really does. It requires a lot of optimism and realism to really drive your team through that.
Definitely. So you've got the psychological aspect as well as the innovation piece. You've got to bring something new to the table.
Oh, and let's talk about that, because we have a phrase internally around the spinny bow tie. When you come up meetings and your bow tie needs to spin around with lights and glitter, fireworks shooting out of it like a Catherine wheel. And listen, you can do that with new clients. But if you've been in a relationship for, it's the same as let's use another analogy. I'm a big fan of today. Let's talk dating. Let's talk first date versus anniversary dinner 10 years in.
Yes.
If you suddenly turn up to your anniversary dinner with your partner with a completely different, kind of outfit and spinny bow tie, they're just not going to buy it, are they?
Correct. Because it's not authentic.
It's not, but
Because they know you.
But then how do you as an incumbent turn up and impress, knowing that there are other agencies who have got their bow ties spinning
Exactly.
in their meetings and their tenders? It's a challenge because you can't be disingenuous.
No.
You can't suddenly say, we're not that agency you've worked with. But equally, you've got to up your game.
Yeah, you can't rest on your laurels. Like, I mean, a good example, given where we are, it's now April 24. If you're not talking about AI in a meaningful way in the repitch and about how you can use it to build efficiency, but how you can use it to drive increased creativity and innovate, and how you can put guardrails around it and where it can go wrong and where it goes right. If you aren't bringing that to the table, that's a problem.
And I think that's actually the opportunity, as you kind of laid out there, Mike, because I think that's where, as an incumbent, the way you bring fresh energy, fresh ideas, shouldn't be a spinny bow tie.
No, it shouldn't.
Shallow spinny bow tie. It should be applied insights, applied intellect that takes this, fascinating, amazing kind of communications landscape we operate within and applies new things. So you actually get the spinny bow tie out of the industry and consumer trends rather than you turning up as a different person. Because, ultimately the strength an incumbent has is, I think Joe Coombs said this in one of your previous, Emma Della Fosse said this in one of your previous podcasts. We've got these slices of expertise in our brains.
Correct.
And as an incumbent agency, you've got years worth of knowledge and expertise, and that counts for a lot. Yeah. And you need to make it count for a lot and kind of remind everybody quite how much intellectual capital you have as an incumbent. Because if a client changes, then that doesn't necessarily transfer that easily.
Because that's tacit knowledge. In the consulting world, we talked about that a lot when I was in mainstream kind of large-scale consulting. Your tacit knowledge, if the client switches for a particular reason, agency, all that stuff in your head, all that tacit knowledge, you can't write everything down. When you do the offboarding, you can't effectively do it to the agency and get them to take on board everything that you've done for the last 5, 7, 10 years. And the clients know that. So as an ex-procurement person, I think about that very carefully. The switching risk is high.
Well, there's a value exchange, isn't there? And I think, again, there's a balance here, because I think for an agency to turn up to a retender and be chest beating about all the amazing things we've done and try and assert that legacy expertise and knowledge, you can come across as overly bombastic and out of touch.
Exactly right.
You've got to do it in a way which is future facing and around the client benefits of that, which often are speed, efficiency, ability to pivot, hit the ground running, all those different things that when you've got accumulated knowledge, you can do really easily.
Yeah.
There is no onboarding because we're ready to go. In fact, we're ready to kind of, supercharge.
Exactly.
It's that language that I think we found is better received. Nobody wants to feel like they have got a gun to their head, and actually you as the incumbent are saying, waggy finger client, you'd be mad to leave us because we know more than you do. That's A, probably not true, and B, not a popular sentiment. So
definitely not.
I think it's tonal.
So let's now move on to the second kind of question, which was around as the incumbent agency, when it comes up for a repitch or a retender comes up, what are the key signs to you that the client's going to switch? What are your kind of, as my son would say, the kind of like tingly spider senses, because he's a Spider-Man fan. What are those things that you go, this isn't looking good? You must have had those over your many years.
Yes, we have. Yes, and we, in our original agency, Tesco was a founding client, and kind of 6-7 years in, they called a retender, and we didn't participate in it.
Right.
And that was in that instance because of a particularly significant senior reorg, and there's a phrase around a new broom that I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with, and this was a new broom. Whatever we did in that tender process wouldn't have been enough. The optics needed to be that Tesco was changing, and it did. So that's obviously one, which we alluded to earlier on, kind of very significant senior changes. But, really, an agency should know through body language and feedback way before you get to that point. Because if you're in a relationship, you should be having those conversations.
Exactly.
Across levels, it's not just a senior conversation. I think everybody should be checking in and saying, how are we doing? Is there anything we could do more of? Anything that's not working for you? Again, to my earlier point, feedback is a gift. And I think we should be asking for it, frequently. But I think, the chips are certainly down if the retender brief arrives or the repitch brief arrives and it's asking for something that you haven't been giving them.
Yeah.
So I think often if the brief lands and it is very similar to the last one you responded to and won, then the kind of the body language of that briefing document is we're looking for the same thing that you're providing, possibly with some improvement, but there or thereabouts, we're looking for an agency like you again.
Yeah.
The brief's completely different. It's probably asking for a very, very different sort of agency.
Exactly right. I mean, it'd be good to get your view also on the kind of a nuance of this, which is in a virtual world, so now whereby we are working remotely, and it's difficult often for agency staff to be in walk the floors and have coffees and meet at the water cooler. So it's tempting to stay at home and work hard and deliver great results, but not build relationships. Do you think that has an impact? How do you manage that so that you can have the water cooler? How's it going? What should we improve on? Where have we tripped up? Just give me some honest feedback, which isn't written down or on a phone call or auditable. Or how do you manage that?
I think you're right. It is harder. I think at a senior level, senior clients still want the in-person conversations, and I think are generally receptive to them. The frequency might be less. It then kind of puts a bit more pressure on those kind of being meaningful conversations when they do happen in person. I don't know. I think sometimes there is an intimacy to a Teams call. We're speaking, kind of now essentially over Teams or, over Google. And I think you can be honest, and I think you can have deep, pointed conversations, but there isn't a casualness that the water cooler allows. That, as you say, if I was walking the floor of client X's office, would enable me to have a more casual conversation around things that might potentially be problematic or not quite working. Probably you'd only raise it to me on a Teams call if it was at a point of being really significant.
Correct.
So I think that's where, we just need to make sure that we continue to force the need for real in-person conversations.
Exactly.
But it can be harder, I think, when COVID pushed us all into much more of a transactional mindset.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I do worry, we talk about it a lot, around younger employees and them having that as their starting point for their career. The relationships are built through technology and Teams rather than through real-life conversations.
Exactly.
It is a worry because I think it only tells part of the relationship story.
Definitely. And I think one thing that I'm seeing now across agencies is, QBRs that are well structured, well organized, delivered, efficiently. The temptation is to do them remotely. I personally think that's a mistake. I think the QBRs are an opportunity to go and see the client, spend a day or so there, do an overnight, have dinners. It's once a quarter. Make the time to build those relationships.
And let's be honest, it's not just a business review; it's a relationship review. And I think that this is a relationship industry, and there's an oversupply of agencies, and therefore the relationships need to be meaningful and valuable.
Yeah.
And if you're just doing a kind of technology call-based QBR, it's a tick box. It's another thing done on someone's to-do list.
Yep.
But do they leave it feeling warmer about you? Probably not.
No, exactly.
They feel fine, but not warmer.
You could probably have done it via email, to be quite frank, if it's just a tick box.
Yeah, how depressing. But yes,
exactly. Right. How depressing is that? So, conscious of your time. So, last question. So, as an outside agency, i.e., you're not the incumbent. So, as an outside agency pitching against an incumbent, what have you learned about the success factors to winning against the incumbent? So, kind of switch the tables around.
Yeah, it's a good question, this one. I think it does vary. I think context is important here. You really need to understand what might have led to this process being initiated, to try and see what potential chinks there are in the armour of the incumbent. There's a Janet Jackson song called "What Have You Done For Me Lately?" And I think often agencies dine out on the last big thing that we did for a client.
Right.
And often that's quite distant memory for the client. And often incumbents haven't maybe done anything quite so great recently. So I think often the opportunity for a challenger agency is really to shine a light on the now and the opportunities that maybe the incumbent haven't quite leveraged yet or got round to leveraging yet. So I think that can often be things like immediately trying to create a relationship with the new potential client around insights in the industry that could be leveraged. That might be a newsletter you send out, through the kind of pitch process to all of the team from procurement through to senior clients, identifying things that if we were working with you, we would want to be talking to you about right now.
Exactly.
Don't lose the pitch. Try and get, again, a bit of an advantage and start building that relationship pre-pitch if you can. And again, kind of unencumbered by the incumbents' issues, which might often be legacy issues.
Yeah.
Don't let reality get in the way of great vision, because often what a challenger agency can do is really see the big opportunity for a brand that an incumbent sometimes can't quite see because they know the can'ts within a business. They know that, we can't get that through IT, we can't get that through legal. And sometimes as an incumbent, it means that you can't present your best work because you know that your vision and your ambition will get nowed. As a challenger brand, you can use intelligent naivety as your ally here and go, listen, we know there might be some pragmatic challenges here, but imagine if we could. And I think you can build vision, big visions as a challenger. And that's where, to our spinny bow tie reference earlier on, a challenger agency can get that spinny bow tie out and they can really impress with what we could do together without having to be bogged down by the practicalities that an incumbent knows they will be told of reasons why we can't.
It reminds me of a line in a song, you don't need eyes to see, you need vision, which I think was Faithless. And it's very true.
Janet Jackson, Faithless. I think we need to kind of start a music podcast now.
Oh, there's an idea, David. Oh, definitely. Absolutely. I'm a vinyl collector. Music and agency business. Brilliant. Brilliant. We could do that. Definitely. There's a new angle there.
Absolutely.
So, David, it's been amazing having you on the podcast. Thank you ever so much.
Pleasure.
If you could leave listeners with just kind of one or two things to do, to do rather than think about, where they're the incumbent, what would you say in order to improve your chances of securing success when it comes up for renewal? Because it will.
Yes, I'm going to echo something I said earlier on, which is about creating a feedback loop early on in a relationship. When we win a new client, I typically set up a onboarding conversation with the CMO or the CEO and say, listen, I want to make sure we've got a dialogue from day one to make sure that we onboard really smoothly and any niggles are kind of very quickly ironed out. I then make sure that's continued beyond the initial immersion onboarding process wherever possible.
Yep.
It might be the frequency goes from weekly or monthly to quarterly, but ensuring that there's a senior feedback loop from the start and encouraging really everybody in your team to also ask for that feedback where possible.
Definitely.
Because you can then anticipate challenges, wrinkles, and opportunities before they become big, hairy, scary wrinkles and challenges.
Brilliant. As you say, feedback is a gift.
Yes.
To be welcomed. David, where can people find out more about you?
redbrickroad.com. Check us out, and also on TikTok, on LinkedIn, and on Instagram.
Very good. David, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks for listening to Higgle, the B2B Sales Club podcast series with your host, Mike Lander. Please subscribe so that you'll catch all the next episodes.